Hello, everyone. This is a new series on the Middle-earth collectible card game from Iron Crown Enterprises. This series will primarily be about strategy and deck building. I'm assuming that you, the listener, know the general rules of the game and how to get around carding them. However, if this is your first exposure to the game or you're just interested in a refresher, I will be including links to some cardnum tutorials and the rulebook of the game. You might find that helpful, and I'll be doing the same for all the videos in this series. Now, there are multiple different play formats in this game, but at least for now, I'm going to be focusing on the two-deck hero versus hero game. It's the most common game format that you'll run into in just online play, and as a corollary of that, it's the one I'm most familiar with, so it's the one I have the most idea of what I'm talking about. A lot of the ideas I'll be stressing in these videos will be generally applicable, but especially for different alignments and you might have like different hazard strategies for different speeds of play. A one deck game is over much faster than a two deck game, so you might want to have different alignments as to how quick you want your decks to be. But going to the two deck hero versus hero game, we have, even before we consider our first deck, first card, or first area, we have two different ways we can win the game, and we should stop and think about what we're trying to do. Are we trying to win the game by getting the One Ring and destroying it, or are we going to try to call the free council and score the 25 points, exhaust our deck at least once, call the council, hope to have more points than our opponent? The two ideas build decks in very different ways, and while, for instance, all ring decks will resemble one another to some extent, you'll want characters that can deal with the corruption of the ring. You'll obviously need the pipeline to play a gold ring, play something that tests it, get the One Ring out, get it to Mount Doom safely, etc. That's going to include a whole bunch of cards that are completely worthless if you're going for points. So you really need to. It's very hard to make a deck that will, oh, I will try to destroy the ring, but if that doesn't work, I'll go for points. Or, oh, I will try to go for points, but, maybe I'll try to bake the ring. I'm going to initially focus on points decks. I hope to make some videos on doing the One Ring, but for now I want to do the points because that's much more generally applicable. Most decks out there are points decks, not One Ring decks, and it'll have much more instructive scope. So, if we're going for points, we need to have a strategy to score our points, and ideally faster than our opponent is either scoring points himself or is able to destroy the One Ring. So there are 6 categories that can score you points. There's characters, allies, items, factions, kills, and miscellaneous. You definitely want to have a nice spread of the first 4 categories because you can't have more than half your points in any one category, and if your opponent has points in a category that you don't, well, then his cards of that category are worth double at the end of the game. I had a long time ago, I had a very, very nasty game. A lot of hazards being thrown around. Very hard for either of us to get factions out. But he played the Southrons, which are big enough at 5 points. And if they doubled to 10, because I had no factions, not a good way to end your game. So we want to have a spread of points. We want to have enough points as backup, because we'll need 25 to call the council, but you probably want more than that in your deck because some of them might not get through. You might have to discard cards, you might fail your influence checks, your allies and characters might get killed, your items might get influenced away. There are all sorts of things that can hamper you, and we'll be trying to do that to our opponent with our hazards. So you want to build a little leeway in the deck. But remember, your opponent is trying to do the same or a similar thing, so we need to beat our opponent to the punch. Speed is very important in this game, and honestly, a good way to think of the success of your deck's resource side is how many points am I scoring on an average turn? And that brings us to geography. We want to go fast. If you have a deck that has the Southrons playable at Southern Oasis, the Iron Hill Dwarves playable at Iron Hill Dwarfhold, the Angmarim up at Carn Dûm, well, that's nine. No, it's 12. Um, that's 12 faction marshalling points contained in 3 cards, and it's great if you'll get them, but you'll notice we kind of have to crisscross all across the board to get to them, and 12 points in 3 turns is great. 12 points in 6 turns when you spend a turn off just marching in the right direction without doing anything that scores you points immediately, not so great. So when I'm starting a points deck, the first thing I always think of is geography. Where on Middle Earth is this deck going to operate? Because if I can concentrate in as small a region as possible, then I limit my exposure to hazards that are playable only in that region. I spend less time moving around. It's great if every card that scores points is within 1 turn's movement of every other card. And it means that with shorter trips, I, again, lower my exposure to hazards for things, especially things like deep wilderness monsters that require you to go through multiple different areas, or just, by moving through a bunch of resource types, I'm going to expose myself more. So I invite you to consider, since we're heroes, we're always going to start at Rivendell up in Rudar here. I invite you to consider this 4-region cluster: Arthedain, Cardolan, Rudar, and Angmar, which, is the old Arnor kingdom plus the one that brought it down. In this little cluster of 4 regions, we can already play a major item at the Barrow Downs, that's worth 2, Tom or Goldberry at the Old Forest, 1 or 3. We can play a 2-point faction or a Rivendell or an information, which is, again, probably worth about 2 points here. So that's 5, if we go with Goldberry. Arthedain lets us play the Rangers of the North, which are worth 3, Palantir of Elistirion, which is worth 2, an information resource, again, like Dreams of Lore, is worth 2, so that's another 7. Rudar, okay, isn't as great. Kamith Bryn, the only thing available is the Hillmen, they're only worth 1. Angmar has 3 different sites we can go to, which allow us to play a greater item, a major item, and a major horde item, which could be worth 8. That's actually, you have to get everything, but that is enough to call the Free Council by itself, assuming you have a reasonable number of characters. If we extend a little bit further, Forhel gives us the Losaden Cairn, where we can play a Palantir, which can be worth quite a few points, 5 if you store some of them. The Losadan lets us play the Lossoth, a 2-point faction, and we can add, say, the Blue Mountains Dwarves here, and the Elves of Linden, which is the only Haven-capable faction. And we have a little kind of brick-shaped stomping ground where every place we're going to go to is within 1 move of every other place we're going to go to. None of them are super dangerous. Okay, Carn Dûm is kind of dangerous, but there, and we can have a very, very tight geography deck, and that's what I'm going to be trying for this deck. So then once we have even if you don't want to stomp around this area, there are other kind of geography-based ideas you could do. You could have a deck, say, that plans to stick around Gondor and muster up all the factions there. You could hang around up in Dragon Country and try to play huge items. You could go to Sauron's area and try to pick up those huge 4 and 5-point factions that are in and around Mordor. But I would suggest that you make your deck where lots of stuff is concentrated in a small area, so that no matter what order you draw your cards in, you can always hop from any one place you're likely to be to any other place you're likely to be. But I do like this Ariader strategy, 1, because we can hop between one of 2 havens if we ever need to heal or play new characters or store something, and 2, because we start in Rivendell, we get a hop on, say, a strategy that's based around Mordor, because we can just run off to our first places. We don't have to waste time getting into position. So, with that in mind, let's think about the places that we're going to go to. Factions-wise, So I'm going to flip over to the deck builder. I've had this memorized, and unfortunately, same as with most CCGs, a lot of this is just going to be building up the knowledge of a lot of strategies, building up the knowledge of the card base, so that you know what everything does, you know where to go for these things. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 factions that I'm going to initially consider. We could add the Hillmen at Cameth Bryn and the Hobbits at Bag End, but they're only worth 1 apiece, and that's a bit weak. So I'm going to put them on the side shelf for now. But let's have Elves of Linden, Blue Mountain Dwarves, Rangers of the North, Lossoth, and I just want to make sure that they're all the hero versions for some, Actually, I think these are all hero-only cards. Yeah. Remember what I said about card knowledge? Do what I say, not what I do. And So there are 2 factions playable at the Worthy Hills. The Wozes of Erenvorn and the Petty Dwarves. They're both worth 2 points, but I'm going to go with the Petty Dwarves for now, because we're probably going to have another dwarf, so, play Blue Mountain Dwarves if we look at the Wozes versus the Petty Dwarves. The Petty Dwarves, we get a bonus for any dwarf, whereas the Wozes don't have any bonus, and the only person who gets a bonus against Woz factions is Gonbury Gon, and I don't think he's that great of a character. So we have five factions. I also want to know, at least the way I build decks, 30 resources, 30 hazards. You can go higher, but more cards you have, the harder it is to predict what you're going to draw next. I like to stick towards the minimums, and it just makes things flow faster and easier. With 30 resources, I do like to kind of mix towards 14, 15 that are worth points, and another 14, 15 to support the other cards that themselves aren't worth points but are going to help my characters make it safely, go to, get to their sites, not get killed by their hazards, by their hazard creatures, or corrupted by their corruption cards, etc. I like this mix because it generally gives me a good chance of drawing something that's worth points. And so, in the same area, we have... the only item we could play here is the Special Palantir of Alisterion. We can play 1 major. We could play a major, but a Palantir is worth more points. Generally, you don't want to go to a site that expose yourself to extra danger, etc., to get something that's weaker than the site's best. If I'm going to Lossadan Cairn, I want a Palantir. There are other sites that I could go to which are probably safer and easier to get to, where I expose myself to less risk, and I create more flexibility by going to any of those to play if I just want a generalized major item. But item-wise, we can get 1 major in the Barrow Downs, a Palantir in Lossadan Cairn, a greater item at Carn Doom, a major item at Mount Graham, and a major horde item at Zarek Doom. Again, we're sticking to our I'm not necessarily saying this is the best strategy, but I do want to illustrate the geography principle, so we're going to cling to this area. So, deck builder. So let's look at our cards. We want resource, hero. We don't want any of the dream cards. We're not playing with that. And let's start looking at greater items with Palantir in the name. And that did that. Very annoying. So we've got 3 that are we can play, and generally I don't think Palantir are that worthwhile to use. It involves a lot of hassle. So I'm going to go with the Palantir of Amon Sol because it's worth 5 if we store it. That's worth more than the 3 that Anuminas has, and it's easier to move. We only need 2 characters to move it as opposed to 4 for Osgiliath. So for the Lossadan Cairn of Amon Sol. Now, for Karn Doom, we can play a greater item. No horde items, I'm afraid. So, what do we have? We can choose between Narsil. Now, Narsil isn't that great, but it can be turned into Andoral with two information cards, so it's something to consider. Orcrist is just a bit more powerful and worth more points immediately without the support cards. Scroll of Isildur is good for ring decks. Arkenstone is good if we have a lot of dwarves. Wormsbane is good if we're going to be fighting dragons, which we might do, since we are planning on going to Zarek Doom. But in general, I do think we got the Mithril Coat, but Mithril Coat boosts our body, which I am not a fan of. And the Iron Crown is powerful, but is worth a mega 5 corruption points, which I do not like. I do have something of a preference for weapons because you just play them and let them go. You probably will be fighting a lot in this game, so anything that increases your prowess is good to have. I'm probably going to go with Wormsbane here. Like you said, we are planning to raid at least one dragon lair. There's the possibility that our opponents will have other dragons. Orcrist is slightly more popular, so it's a kind of meta thing. I'd rather not risk someone playing it, so we're going to put Wormsbane in the deck. Now we go on to major items. Now, again, we don't want to go to Zarek Doom for a non-horde item, so let's look at the hordes. We could do Valiant Sword, Magical, which is a weapon. This is a difference. It doesn't give us direct prowess, but it can reduce the number of strikes, which is nice. Magical Harp will protect us from certain things that discard characters, which I think, again, I don't like armor, so you only have to make body checks if you fail prowess checks, so I'd rather get items that boost our prowess and avoid needing to make body checks in the first place than something that gives us body. So I'm going to go with the Valiant Sword. And then 2 more non-horde major items. Glamdring is very powerful. Torque of Hughes to cancel attacks is very powerful. Durin's Axe is great if we have dwarves, and we probably are going to include one to help with our factions. So let's go with Durin's Axe and the Torque of Hughes. We might want to, if we're willing to expand our geographical scope, we might want to include Glamdring as well. We could go to, say, Isles of the Dead That Live. That, again, I think... let's add that. So let's add another major item so that we can get Glamdring, which is awesome. Okay, so we now have 6 items, 5 factions, and let's include... Now let's think about allies, because again, we don't want to have 0. Allies aren't worth a huge amount of points. I generally include them more for use value than for point value, but you don't want your opponents getting double points. So we could play Build the Pony, playable at Breer Bag End even if the site's tapped. Something that's playable at tapped site is always nice because then you can get more points in a single turn. But at -2 prowess, no skills, an ability that's not great that involves discarding him, I'm not a huge fan. Goldberry at the Old Forest is a definite contender. She can't fight, but she can cancel any effect that would return us to the site of origin or an attack keyed to wilderness. And if you look at the area we're considering moving around in, it's 1 Shadowland, 1 Free Domain, 1 Coastal Sea, and a lot of wilderness. So I do think Goldberry's a strong contender. Gollum is a great ally, but he would involve us moving up to High Pass and Goblin Gate to play him. I think I'm going to pass for this deck. Guahir is outside of our zone. Mistress Lobelia is a very nice ally, but she very much restricts where the party can move. She gets discarded if she leaves Bree, Old Forest, White Towers, or the Shire. So anyone going with her will probably be stuck with her for the rest of the game. Skipping ahead a bit, Tom Bombadil is slightly less restricted. Now we're 3, which is the most points of any ally in the game. He's a sage if we need one, and he has a 12 prowess and 11 body, so he is an awesome fighter and can cancel hazards that target the company. But again, he will restrict. We can't go to, say, our big item cluster in Angmar with him. We can't go to the Isles of the Dead that Live. We can't go to Nimeriader or Linden to play our factions there. So I'm probably not. I'm probably. And the other thing is that since they're both playable at the Old Forest, they compete with each other. We'd have to untap the site or do something to play an ally outside of their home site to play both. So I'm probably going to go with Goldberry, and then I think 3 Noble Hounds. We have quite a few border holds that we can visit in our geographic zone. We can play them as kind of an adjunct to, say, the Rangers of the North or the Lossoth, or Goldberry herself. Don't think Tom and Goldberry had any dogs. They're not mentioned in the books. They have a pony named Fatty Lumpkin, but no dogs. So for this, we're going to have Goldberry and 3 Noble Hounds. Now, we've already got 15 cards. Between them, we have 4 ally points, 5, 7, 9, 12 faction points, 9, assuming we get a dwarf, 13, 15, 17, 19 item points. That is easily enough to call the free council, since we'll also probably have some character points in there. And that will get us going for that's, and we'll probably include some more points in this. In fact, I'm going to put one in right now. Just try it. I figure by the time we recycle the deck at least once, we'll probably be a little less but probably not need to move as much. The extra 3 points at an easy, safe site is going to be a bit more worthwhile. And I think this is a good place to end this video. With the next video, we are going to discuss a few more concepts and then get into the hazard side of the deck. I know I need more resources to fill out the 15, the remaining 15 for the resource deck, but I'm going to want to give some thought as to what sort of, because right now we have a plan of where we're going and what points we're going to try to score to win. The next thing on the resource side to go into is what sort of characters we're going to have to do these tasks. So, we'll need to figure out who's good at influencing these factions, who can move around in the areas safely. Do we want to focus primarily on stealth or prowess to keep our characters safe? And I usually do that after I go into the hazards, because with the hazards, we're going to create environments that might favor one side of the equation or another and influence which characters we're going to do. So that's going to be another video, and with that, I am ending this one. Hope you enjoyed.